The dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, streaming through the attic's single window. Harper had been sent up to find the holiday decorations, a familiar chore for a quiet Saturday. But something else caught her eye. A loose piece of insulation near the eaves, out of place. She tugged at it gently, and her fingers brushed against something solid and smooth, hidden behind the pink fiberglass. It was a small wooden box, its edges worn soft, the latch rusted shut. She had to work it open. Inside, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, were envelopes, dozens of them. The paper felt thin and fragile, like dried leaves. The ink on the addresses was faded to a soft blue, the handwriting an elegant cursive she didn't recognize. None of the envelopes had been opened. Each one was sealed shut, as if waiting. She carried her find downstairs, the box feeling heavier with each step. Her mother was at the kitchen sink, her back to the room. The moment she turned and saw what Harper held, the glass she was drying slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile. Her face, usually so calm, tightened into a mask of something Harper had never seen before. Not quite anger, but a sharp, startled fear. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was too high, too thin. She snatched the box away, her movements quick and final. That reaction, more than the hidden letters themselves, planted the first small, quiet seed of doubt. Something in their family story wasn't adding up. The question of the box wouldn't leave her. A few days later, Harper found herself on the porch of Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. She'd known Harper her whole life, always with a kind word and a bowl of candy on her stoop at Halloween. Harper went under the pretense of returning a borrowed pie dish, but her real questions hovered in the air between them. Mrs. Gable welcomed her in, the scent of lemon polish and baked goods filling the small living room. She poured them both tall glasses of lemonade, the ice cubes cracking in the silence. Harper's questions came out hesitant, clumsy. She asked about what the neighborhood was like when her parents first moved in, about what she was like as a baby. Mrs. Gable's answers were careful, measured. She spoke of Harper being a quiet infant, of her parents being young and very private, of it being a difficult time for everyone. Her words were kind, but they were chosen, like she was walking on a tightrope of someone else's secrets. Then, she rose and fetched a photo album. She pointed to a picture of a neighborhood picnic. There was a much younger version of her mother, holding a baby, Harper. But standing just beside them, her hand gently on the baby's head, was another woman. A woman with Harper's same dark eyes and serious mouth. The woman was cropped out of the copy of this photo that hung in their own hallway. Harper didn't say anything. She just nodded, sipping her lemonade. But later that night, alone in her room, she carefully traced the face of the unknown woman on a piece of paper. A small, quiet act of rebellion to preserve a memory she wasn't supposed to have. The public library became her sanctuary. It was quiet, anonymous, and full of answers she couldn't ask for at home. She started with the microfilm machine in the local histories section, its green screen casting a pale light on her face. She scrolled through old issues of the town newspaper, her finger tracing the announcements page. She found their wedding announcement, just as she'd always been told. But the date was wrong. It was months later than the story her parents repeated at family gatherings. She kept digging, her heart beating a little faster. She searched for her own birth announcement. It wasn't there. Not in the weekly she checked, nor in the one for the entire month she was supposedly born. There was a gap in the community records, a quiet void where her arrival should have been celebrated. She requested her old school records from the district office, a request she made with a fabricated story about a genealogy project. The file showed an unexpected transfer. She hadn't started kindergarten at Valley Elementary, as she'd always believed. Her records showed she'd been enrolled somewhere else first, for just a few months, before abruptly transferring in. The timeline was a puzzle, and none of the pieces her family had given her seemed to fit. She sat at the library table, surrounded by the quiet rustle of pages, connecting the discrepancies into a picture that looked nothing like the story she knew. The tension in the house had become a physical thing, a thick silence that everyone politely ignored. A few nights later, Harper was lying in bed, trying to read, when the low murmur of voices drifted up through the heating vent in her floor. It was her parents, their tones hushed but urgent. She pressed her ear closer to the grate. "Can't keep this up forever," her father was saying, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "She's asking questions." "She's at that age. She's smart." Her mother's reply was tighter, strained. It was the right decision. For her. For everyone. "That was a difficult time, you remember. We agreed." Then, a phrase that made Harper's blood run cold. "What about Clara?" her father asked, the name hanging in the air between them. "What if she tries to find Clara?" Her mother's voice dropped to a near whisper, but the fear in it was clear. "She wouldn't. She doesn't know. Mrs. Gable would never." The rest was lost to the rumble of the furnace kicking on. Harper pulled away from the vent, her heart pounding against her ribs. Clara. The name from the letters. She retreated under her covers, the fragments of the conversation swirling in her head alongside the library dates and the cropped photograph. That night, and for many nights after, she lay awake staring at the patterns the streetlights made on her ceiling, connecting the fragments into a story she was terrified and desperate to understand. The wooden box felt like a lead weight in her hands. She carried it down to the kitchen the next morning and set it on the table between her mother's coffee and her father's toast. The sound of the latch hitting the wood was too loud in the quiet room. Her mother looked up, her smile fading as her eyes landed on the box. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly much older. Her coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Her father put down his newspaper with a slow, deliberate motion. He didn't look surprised. He just let out a heavy, weary sigh, a sound of pure resignation that seemed to hold the weight of years. "Harper," he began, but her mother cut him off. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was a strained whisper. "The attic," Harper said, her own voice steadier than she felt. "I found the letters." "Who is Clara?" The question hung in the air. Her mother looked from the box to Harper's face, her expression a war between fear and love. What followed were not lies, but partial truths, offered like small, fragile bones. They spoke of complicated circumstances, a difficult period before Harper was born. They talked about a family friend who had been important but was no longer in the picture, about decisions made for everyone's well-being. The words were technically true, she could feel it, but they were a fence built around a much larger truth, and the gap between what was said and what was palpably being concealed yawned wide between them. They were protecting her from something, and that something had a name. Clara. The address was there, on the oldest of the unopened letters, written in that same faded blue ink. A street name in a neighboring town Harper had never visited. She saved her allowance for 2 weeks, the secret a hard knot in her stomach. On a Saturday, she told her parents she was spending the day at the library. She instead walked to the bus station and bought a ticket. The ride felt endless, the landscape outside the window blurring into a wash of green and gray. Her hands were clenched in her lap, clutching the piece of paper with the address. The town was smaller than hers, quieter. She asked for directions at a small corner store and followed them to a large, well-kept building with a discreet sign out front. It wasn't a house. It was a nursing home. Her steps slowed as she walked up the path. The lobby was bright and clean, smelling faintly of disinfectant and flowers. Her eyes scanned the directory on the wall, her finger trembling as it traced the list of names. And there it was. Clara Evans, room 214. The elevator ride to the second floor was the longest of her life. The door to 214 was slightly ajar. Harper pushed it open slowly. A woman sat in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at the gardens. She turned at the sound, and Harper's breath caught in her throat. The woman had Harper's eyes. The same dark, serious eyes she saw every day in the mirror. The same slight curve to her smile. The woman didn't look startled. She just looked, her gaze soft and knowing. "I wondered if you'd ever come," she said, her voice gentle. She gestured to a small desk where a bundle of letters, identical to the ones in the box, were tied with a faded ribbon. "I wrote to you every month. I just never could send them." This wasn't a story of abandonment. It was a story of sacrifice, of a love so profound its only expression was a lifetime of silent, watchful distance. The promises in those letters were never broken. They were just kept, silently, waiting for this moment. Harper sat in the quiet room, the unopened letters resting on the small table between them. Clara's hands, thin and veined, smoothed the ribbon that bound her own stack of correspondence. She didn't rush. The truth, she explained, had been waiting for 17 years. It could wait a few minutes more. She reached into the drawer of her nightstand and withdrew a simple manila folder. Inside were not letters, but documents. Medical documents. The diagnosis was there, in stark clinical language from another era. A progressive illness, one with a grim and certain prognosis. Clara had been 22, a new mother, when she learned her future was not the one she had dreamed of. The choice was not between keeping her daughter or giving her up. The choice was between a childhood shadowed by hospital visits and gradual, terrifying loss, or a childhood filled with stability, with two parents who were healthy, ready, and desperate for a child of their own. It was an impossible equation built on love, not lack of it. The silence wasn't abandonment. It was protection. Clara had asked for no contact. A clean break she believed would be less painful for everyone, especially for the little girl who would only know her as a fading memory of sickness. But she couldn't let go completely. Through a network of mutual friends, a whispered word here, a passed-along school photo there, she had kept a silent watch. She knew about Harper's first steps, her first day of school, the time she broke her arm falling out of the oak tree. She knew it all. And Mrs. Gable. Their kind, lemonade-serving neighbor had been the silent guardian at the gate for nearly 2 decades. The trusted friend to Harper's parents and the faithful secret keeper for Clara, ensuring the threads of connection, however thin, were never fully severed. Harper finally understood the depth of the sacrifice. It wasn't a single moment of giving up. It was a lifetime of letting go. Every single day, for her daughter's sake. The kitchen light was on when Harper returned home late that evening. Her parents were sitting at the table, the untouched wooden box between them. They didn't ask where she'd been. They just looked at her, their faces etched with a lifetime of fear and love. The silence was different this time. It wasn't hiding anything. It was just waiting. Harper pulled out a chair and sat. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She simply said, "I met Clara." And then she told them Clara's story. As she spoke, her mother's rigid posture softened. A single tear traced a path down her father's cheek, then another. They were not tears of guilt, but of a shared, long-carried grief finally being released into the open air. They cried for the young woman who made an impossible choice. They cried for the years of living with a secret that was never truly theirs to keep. They spoke for hours, the three of them, in that quiet kitchen. The story unfolded fully for the first time, the pieces clicking into a complete, heartbreaking, and beautiful picture. They talked about the first visit, all together, planned for the following weekend. There was no anger left, only a profound, aching understanding of the weight that comes with loving someone enough to make a choice you know will break your own heart. Her mother finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "We have never, for a single second, regretted you. We only ever regretted the pain that brought you to us." The family hadn't been broken by the truth. It had simply, finally, expanded to include the missing piece that made the whole story make sense. It was a new beginning built on the foundation of an old and enduring love.